Wuhan, where the epidemic started, is speeding up after 11 weeks of lockdown. The Chinese government is trying to make up for its slow and secretive start. Exporting medical equipment as aid boosts its brand as a global leader, while the US is turning inwards, pulling funding from the WHO just when global coordination is most needed.
The United States of America has been a long-standing and generous friend to WHO, and we hope it will continue to be so. We regret the decision of the President of the United States to order a hold in funding to the World Health Organization.
A Chinese cartoon suggests they see the US move not as genuine concern about the WHO's performance, but a clear attempt at shifting blame.
Currently, the world is in a dire situation and at a key stage. The decision of the US will undercut the ability of WHO and damage the global cooperation of fighting the epidemic. Every country in the world will be affected, including the US.
President Trump says he wants an inquiry into WHO failures. But maybe he's trying to distract attention from his own. For 2 months after China alerted the world to COVID-19, he did little to prepare, which is surely not the fault of the WHO.
I told that to President Xi. I said the World Health Organization is very China-centric, meaning whatever it is, China was always right. You can't do that. Can't do that. Not right. The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet, and share information in a timely and transparent fashion.
Still shaking hands, President Xi Jinping met the WHO head on January the 28th. WHO has not publicly criticized China for its initial cover-up, but UN chiefs tend to be diplomatic and cajole rather than condemn.
And side by side, you have started serious public health measures.
Britain announced an extra £65 million for the WHO on April the 12th. France is among several countries who have regretted President Trump's move.
We fervently hope that there is a quick return to a normal situation and that the WHO, which has faced an unprecedented pandemic, as has the rest of the world, can do its work in peace.
Critics say the WHO is too bureaucratic and politicised, but still plays an essential role, as the number of coronavirus cases exceeds 2 million worldwide. Now has to be the worst time possible to withdraw the money the organisation desperately needs.
Lindsay Hilson there, and we can go live to our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan, Donald Trump says he's cut funding because he's disappointed with the World Health Organization. Is there more to it?
Well, yes, Fatima, we know Donald Trump is no stranger, gleefully severs ties, but this is very much being seen as him trying to deflect criticism away from himself. And there is much criticism to deflect, summed up perhaps well today by Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, who wrote in a letter to her Democrats last night, listen to this, because of an incompetent reaction to this health crisis, the strong economy handed to Donald Trump is now a disaster. The truth is a weak person, a poor leader, takes no responsibility, she said. A weak person blames others. That is exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do here. The timing, too, suspicious. It came a day after that particularly combative press conference where he was lashing out at reporters left, right and centre, and where he played that propaganda-style video aimed at showing that he, Donald Trump, had got onto this crisis as soon as possible. The truth is, though, that he did not. And he knows he's being criticised by everybody for squandering weeks where he could have done something, but instead really only woke up to the crisis at the beginning to the middle of March, which was long time after the WHO had declared this a public health emergency. And then there's this irony that the very thing that he's accusing the WHO of praising China, he did so himself for weeks and publicly standing on stages and in those press briefings praising China and praising President Xi himself. So then again, here we have Donald Trump saying one thing, but doing another.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. Kathy.
Well, I'm joined now by Lawrence Gossin, a professor of global health law and the director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Centre on National and Global Health Law, and by Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and former administrator of the UN Development Programme. Helen Clark first, how big a blow is this decision from Donald Trump in terms of fighting the coronavirus pandemic across the world?
It's a huge blow when your biggest contributor to a multilateral decides they're not going to contribute anymore. But it's a particular blow when it comes in the middle of WHO leading the health response to this appalling pandemic. So this will be felt very, very hard in the corridors in Geneva.
Well, Lawrence Gossin, how will this be felt across the world? What are the implications here?
Well, I agree with Helen, of course. There are many things that President Trump has done that's broken with allies and has been counterproductive from the international perspective. But I really believe that cutting funding for WHO in the middle of a once-in-a-century public health crisis is a bridge too far, and it will come back to haunt the United States very badly. I think we will lose our influence and our voice in international affairs and health, and it couldn't come at the worst time when hundreds of thousands of people are dying. I'm truly dismayed, and in some ways it's jaw-dropping.
Helen Clark, there have been criticisms of the WHO, for example, the delay in declaring a global emergency in this pandemic, but also in how they tackled Ebola, sort of similar criticisms there. Are some of those criticisms justified?
With Ebola, yes, there was justified criticism. And after that, the WHO turned itself inside out to revamp the way in which it approached a pandemic. And thank heavens it did. Because by and large, I think when one looks at the timeline of how it's responded to this pandemic, you would really have to be fairly nitpicking to find fault. They weren't told until the 31st of December. Who knows how long Beijing had known? Wuhan had known for a while, but hadn't reported it. But then events went at a reasonable clip. By the middle of the month, WHO was able to say, yes, we believe we have evidence of human-to-human transmission. It takes a while to get this kind of information out of China. Then the Director General did, by around the 22nd, 23rd of January, convene under the International Public Health Emergency Regulations, the committee that advises him. They didn't decide to advise him to declare the global public health emergency at that point, but by the 30th of January they did. He acts on advice, he acts on evidence, and from then on, I think the WHO has been getting the right information out, the right guidance. The problem is that not enough countries have been listening to it. Now, certainly President Trump hasn't been listening. I watched the rather pained faces of very senior and credible public health officials who appear with him on media daily. President Trump was warned for weeks and weeks and weeks that he had to act, and he didn't. And I think those who are saying that this attack on WHO is deflecting, or an attempt to deflect criticism of how he's handled it, are spot on.
Lawrence Gossin, do you agree with that assessment?
I absolutely do agree with that assessment. I mean, I would say that China was less than transparent, and I think that if one wanted to look back and see where this pandemic was seated globally, it would be in about the 6 weeks after the first case arose in the Wuhan wet market. During that time, there was no transparency, there was a sanctioning of whistleblowers, and WHO had no independent means to verify the data that was coming out from China. And so WHO
let me just
reported as quickly as it could. Yes. Please.
Let me just put that to Helen Clark. After this pandemic is over, if we can see the end of it, is that a chance for the world to reboot its relationship with China, and particularly the US, the UK and the West?
Well, I think that the US is in a category of its own in the way it has turned on China over this. Let's face it, China has a very, very different political system from that enjoyed in the US, the United Kingdom and New Zealand. I think if there's a lesson for China from this, it is that the world expects a country as large and powerful as that to be transparent, honest, upfront about anything like this, because delay is fatal. We saw the same thing with SARS going back to 2003. Notification comes too late. The genie's out of the bottle. So the plea really is to China, if you want to show world leadership, show it on health issues. Come clean quick, because then there's a better chance of getting the whole international community to rally around to do something. We're now faced with a situation where, distressing and tragic and horrific as the health pandemic is, this is a full-blown economic and social crisis, and it's going to take trillions to dig us out of this. It's a worse catastrophe financially, economically, socially than the global financial crisis, which isn't that long ago.
Helen Clark, Lawrence Gostin, thank you both very much.